Hello everyone and welcome to the iJet webinar, Risk Management for Offsite Events. My name is Erica Sante and I will be moderating this webinar. Offsite events like corporate meetings and industry conferences are high-profile investments for every type of organization. These events present novel challenges for most organizational leaders, yet security professionals are uniquely charged with ensuring the same standard of risk management they ordinarily deliver in the headquarters environment. Safeguarding life safety, proprietary products and information, and the corporate brand are essential challenges that are posed in a wide variety of conditions. The ever-changing threat environment in today's world requires a comprehensive assessment of risk-effective planning and preparations for a rapid response. Because after all, your ability to respond quickly to an incident or an event significantly impacts exposure to your people and your organization. Here to lead us through today's presentation is guest speaker Bob Howell, Senior Advisor, Critical Operations here at iJet International. Bob is a key component to iJet's Global Operations Division, serving as Senior Advisor, Critical Operations. He advises and mentors client decision makers on operational planning and risk mitigation strategies for operating globally with confidence. Bob has a subject matter expertise in security management, internal investigations, physical security, technical security, surveillance detection, counter-surveillance, and protective service operations. Bob is a U.S. Marine Corps counterintelligence veteran. He was a successful founder and business owner of a security and intelligence company, and previously served as the crisis management, protective service, and investigative lead for Accenture's Global Asset Protection team. Good afternoon, Bob.
Good afternoon, Erica.
I'm going to transfer the controls to you now so you can drive and lead us through this presentation.
Okay. Of course, the hosting of offsite events is a major undertaking for any organization. Whether you're hosting an offsite event domestically or internationally, the principles of your event risk management program are the same. In hosting leadership conferences, training seminars, client forums, etc., a proactive approach in identifying risk exposure is a necessity. Numerous actions and assessments must be completed to identify event risk profile and the development of an appropriate risk mitigation measures. Proactive training of all parties involved and the continuous monitoring of potential impacts to safety, security, and brand reputation are paramount in providing a safe, secure operating environment as well as a timely and effective response to any incident. Escalating global threats over the past 40 years clearly demonstrate an increasing risk to operating globally with confidence and greatly impact our decisions in choosing a location for offsite meetings or events. Considerations for not only crime and terrorism, but the probability of natural disasters and health-related concerns must be assessed and mitigated as part of our overall planning process. Over the past 40 years, while the total number of hurricanes worldwide has remained relatively consistent, the number in the North Atlantic has doubled. What's worse, the global number of Category 5 and Category 4 hurricanes has nearly doubled in number from roughly 100 per decade in the 1970s to about 180 in the 2000s. We can see here that incidents of terrorist attacks on hotels has also grown steadily over the past 4 decades. As of January 2015 to present, there have been 14 reported hotel attacks in 9 separate countries, and a continuation and increase in these attacks is expected to continue. Health concerns. Not only have a new infectious diseases such as SARS and avian influenza appeared, but diseases once thought to have been wiped out are reemerging. For example, a systematic eradication program in the 1950s largely eliminated dengue fever in the Americas by the 1970s. Once the program was discontinued, however, dengue came back stronger than ever. In the last 50 years, the reported incidence of dengue worldwide has increased 30-fold, where estimates of unreported cases are, of course, much higher. The Zika virus is a perfect example of our globalization has facilitated the spread of the virus around the world. While Zika originated in Africa in 1947, the virus reached South America, then Central America, the Caribbean, and then Mexico in 2015, with Zika-infected mosquitoes discovered in southern Florida this past summer. Tourism, business travelers, and even the 2014 World Cup games in Brazil are all credited as global promoters of the Zika virus. We must take into account both known and potential health risks in our meetings and event planning process, and how significant is the risk. Do we choose another event location? How do we communicate with attendees and official guests beforehand? What is your infectious disease response? And how do we communicate during the event about real-life infectious disease concerns? You must be prepared to address these concerns and provide realistic communications to all parties. The hotel selection process is also a key component in identifying risk exposure. Hotel attacks have been on the increase in the recent past and becoming one preferred modus operandi of terrorist organizations around the world today. This slide demonstrates the hotel attacks from 2015 to present. The concentration of desirable targets in one location and the immediate media attention gathered by these attacks present hotels an attractive target for terrorist organizations. The graphic here demonstrates the higher risk locations of hotel attacks in 2015, and we can expect to see an expansion of this modus operandi throughout other conflict areas around the world. Numerous considerations come into play with every event, and they must be included within our risk mitigation planning process. Aside from infectious disease, natural disaster, and terrorist concerns, we must also assess the impact of labor strikes, major sporting events like the Super Bowl or the World Cup games, economic forums, diplomatic visits, local elections, and planned demonstrations or protests. These events tend to bring additional police and/or military presence and create transportation delays with limited free access to certain locations. This enhanced security presence may also serve to increase the possibility of confrontation and violence. This is where effective liaison and coordination with local authorities and your diplomatic mission is essential to being informed of any such planned activities for risk mitigation. A perfect example here is the Hong Kong umbrella movement in 2014. These protests lasted 79 days and presented significant disruptions to business operations during this time frame. As this was the first real challenge to the new Chinese government in Hong Kong, the level of response to be executed was not clear and raised serious concerns for meeting and event planners and the safety of staff and attendees. Aside from obvious safety concerns, as you can see from this map, the sheer size of these protests blocked significant roadways, prevented access to job sites, and significantly impact scheduled events, business continuity operations, and commercial enterprise. Rapidly expanding incidents such as this may not be foreseeable, but serve as a perfect example of how we must continuously monitor the risk environment and implement our risk mitigation strategies as quickly as possible. Do I move my event to a less impacted location? Can I modify my transportation plan to safely mitigate the risk? Or do I cancel the event in total? These are tough decisions with significant cost impact to any organization. The Brussels terrorist attack in March of this year demonstrates the impact terrorist attacks can have as well. What staff and attendee training has been provided for an effective response? How do you account for the safety and well-being of all personnel? What response planning and capabilities can be provided? What is your emergency response plan? What about medical support? What is your evacuation plan should it be required? These questions must be answered and properly addressed within your risk management program. Here we can see how the Brussels terrorist attack highlights another modus operandi concern for future airport attacks. Once again, the accumulation of large number of tourists and business travelers in one location make airports an attractive target. In the Brussels airport attack, the first bomb was detonated within the ticketing area, and the second bomb was timed to be detonated a few minutes later at the main entrance exit to maximize casualties as people fled the ticketing area. Specific airport travel security training should be included guidance to pre-book tickets wherever possible and to migrate through airport security as quickly as possible with specific guidance to spend as little time as necessary in unsecured areas of the airport. Clearly, as represented by this graph, the longer it takes for an organization to respond to an incident, the greater the risk to personnel and the higher the cost to your organization, both in the safety of personnel as well as corporate brand and reputation. Preparedness is key. Proper meeting and event planning combined with implementation of appropriate risk mitigation measures, when backed up by an effective communication plan and conducting drills and exercises for all parties concerned, provide a timely response capability that reduces corporate exposure and cost to your organization. There are two strategies to mitigating risk in the event risk management: proactive and reactive. Proactive strategies encompasses 4 stages. As you see here, planning and training of human assets, i.e. employees, travelers, expats, the real-time 24/7, 365 monitoring of global situations, and cultivating the ongoing intelligence with the potential to impact the event. Locating impacted travelers and employees should an incident happen, your ability to reach out and validate their safety and well-being. And then the communicating with impacted travelers and employees when necessary. Letting them know that something's happened. Letting them know what the next steps are to respond. Your incident response is identified with your reactive strategies within your emergency response plan. When a reaction is required to any incident or response, it then becomes a new baseline that feeds planning and training. And as with any mature process, feedback must be incorporated to provide the necessary input for improvement and change from lessons learned. Let's take a moment here to review the various program maturity levels. How does your organization rate for maturity? What maturity level have you achieved? Have you just begun the process, or have you formalized an event risk management program within your organization? If you are conducting off-site events, the goal here is to be optimized at a level 5. With any event risk management program that is fully integrated throughout all functions, throughout all functional groups of your organization is key. As you can see here, cross-organizational integration is required to facilitate proper planning and coordination of all parties involved. Each functional group within your organization has responsibilities that can impact your response and support capabilities to a given incident. Business continuity program, from a policy compliance and cybersecurity to traveler services for travel support and traveler tracking, of personnel potentially impacted by an incident to your legal or contract support of vendors, hotels, and event venues, and HR for available insurance benefits, medical services, and employees' emergency contact information, and of course your security division for risk assessments, venue hotel security, and liaison with local authorities to facilitate timely, coordinated response where needed. Your risk-based analysis starts with, what do I have to protect? What do I have to protect it from? And what do I have to protect it with? What do I have to protect identifies your elements of risk, your people, assets, and company brand. What do I have to protect it from? This identifies what are the threats, who is the bad guy, what are my vulnerabilities, where are the areas if exploited cause an incident, and what is the consequence, what happens when an incident occurs, and what do I have to protect it with. This is your risk mitigation and emergency response planning for appropriate actions and resources designed to mitigate and respond to identified risks. Have you secured the necessary resources to mitigate the potential exposure to personnel, assets, and the company? Let's talk about stressor analysis. Stressor analysis, risk is determined through stressor analysis. These are the dynamic forces that place your personnel, assets, and company brand at risk. These stressors are identified as threats, hazards, and operational barriers and can be categorized within your disruptor profile on our next slide for the development of appropriate risk mitigation measures and response planning. As you see here, our disruptor profile can then be categorized as proactive and reactive measures, as threats, hazards, and barriers. Threats are defined as those stressors with the ability and motivation to cause an impact like activist or terrorist attacks. Hazards include both kinetic and unsafe atmospheric, such as a charter bus crash or an earthquake or typhoon. And barriers are represented by impact caused through legal regulatory requirements, intellectual property, or company policy restrictions. Here we can see examples of identified threats, hazards, and barrier stressors with the potential to have an impact to a meeting or event. Keep in mind, more common stressors experienced by events include street crimes of opportunity, ATM fraud, and transportation delays, all of which can be addressed through proactive risk mitigation measures. There are 10 key process areas within a risk management program. Conduct required risk assessments of venues, hotels, restaurants, extracurricular activities. Don't forget about off-site activities, restaurants, charity events, other things that are being attended. Assess the current threat environment and other planned major events to determine the risk profile, major sporting events, planned demonstrations. Keep these things in mind. With the disclosure of the risk profile, leadership can determine if the proposed location is within acceptable tolerance parameters and render approval or dismissal. With leadership approval, the appropriate risk mitigation measures can then be developed and implemented to minimize exposure to personnel and the organization. Risk monitoring. The continuous monitoring both prior to and during the event is required to identify any changes in the risk profile that may require upgrade or additional mitigation strategies. Your response planning then serves to address those stressors, threats, hazards, and barriers with the ability or potential to cause impact and facilitates effective action to respond quickly and effectively to reduce exposure. You must also ensure compliance with company policy and procedures. What are your contractual obligations? What about insurance requirements? And, of course, your organization's travel policy. And providing pertinent training for internal and external staff is absolutely necessary to clearly identify appropriate swim lanes along with duties and responsibilities. Who is responsible for what? And in higher risk environments, running drills or conducting an exercise scenario proves beneficial in flushing out weaknesses to be addressed and providing a timely and effective response to an incident. Notifications require clear guidance on how to report an incident, when are local authorities informed, what other groups within your organization should be informed, and the escalation process to notify leadership. And do not forget data management requirements, Cybersecurity is an additional concern that cannot be ignored. Company intellectual property as well as client data and PII information must be protected in accordance with company policy and your client contractual obligations. Keep in mind, certain countries have very aggressive and sophisticated intelligence collection efforts where laptops and mobile smartphones are highly susceptible to compromise. And finally, communications. Communications, both internal and external, is a vital component within your process. It is the fabric by which all parties stay informed and enables your ability to respond quickly and efficiently to an incident. These 10 key process areas are instrumental in the development of a fully integrated event risk management program. Now let's elaborate on some additional considerations. As mentioned earlier, disruptions in transportation services pose considerable concerns with the potential to have significant impact. Liaison and coordination with local authorities, diplomatic mission, external resources must include a thorough review of any transportation concerns. Example, union strike and public transportation systems are not uncommon, particularly in developing nations. And what about volcano? These eruptions and airborne volcanic dust routinely impact airline operations, causing severe delays and cancellations. Unrestricted access to venues, hotels, and other planned activities is dependent upon transportation services and clear transportation routes that may be impeded by these events. Venue site selection, another key element. Advanced site surveys are required. And not only choosing an appropriate event venue, but your hotel selection process and any off-site event planning locations as well. Aside from obvious considerations of crime, terrorism, and natural disasters, what other major events will be in the area? Are there any major political or social events planned during the event? A Bon Jovi concert, a religious holiday, for example. Be sure your risk assessment includes a thorough review of the entire planned route for all off-site locations. While the departure point and the final destination may be well within acceptable risk profile, what is the risk posed by the route to and from? Is there any history of road crime? What are the road conditions? These are considerations and risk factors that must also be included within your assessment process. Now let's talk about hotel selection. Aside from a desirable location and available hotel services, fire and general security measures are major considerations in choosing your hotels. Liaison with local authorities, other clients in the area, your diplomatic mission, all are resources you should exploit within your hotel assessment process. Be sure to verify fire suppression systems and walk the fire exits to ensure they are free of clutter and offer unobstructed egress from the hotel. Review the fire evacuation plan and ensure this information is provided to all hotel guests as appropriate. Is there a 24/7 on-site security staff? Be sure to coordinate with hotel security on a daily basis for reporting of any incidents or safety and security updates. And in higher risk locations, review what is the past history of the hotel. Is the setback distance accessible? Are there access control systems present, as well as the capability and response time of local police, fire, and emergency services? These considerations all must be taken into account during our hotel assessments. The use of a security coordinator is highly recommended. This is a local security professional, usually retired law enforcement or military, with local agency contacts to facilitate official liaison with local authorities, diplomatic missions, protective service details, event venue, hotel security teams, and other planned activity locations. The security coordinator is a 24/7 on-call resource during the event and works alongside your security and event planning teams. The security coordinator may also be bilingual and further assist with advanced risk and route planning assessments and the development of the overall risk profile. Ensure your route planning assessments include a full impact review of fire and life safety. What is the response time and capability of local emergency services? Occupational safety. Are the current road conditions and traffic patterns acceptable? Local crowd control policies and procedures. What is the impact to my route plan? This assessment will serve to validate any potential movement restrictions, such as alternating one-way streets at varying times of the day, or conditions that may impact planned egress and ingress routes. Now let's talk about your response planning. Of course, your response plan must also include a detailed review and updating of any local crisis and incident management plans, and an update of your risk profile as necessary. Conduct a thorough review of your business continuity plan and ensure cybersecurity has been addressed. What is the cybersecurity policy for the event? And what is the escalation process for a cyber incident? Validate all responsible parties are aware of the planned event. Research and identify available and appropriate medical treatment facilities and their capabilities. And establish a command, control, and communication system to supervise ongoing safety and security protocols through attendee arrival and departure dates. The proper presentation and planning of the security coordinator role and the additional external resources is critical. It is important to define their duties and responsibilities and establish a clear chain of command for these resources. Provide proper travel safety, security, and in some cases cultural awareness training to all attendees and official guests. Provide all parties one 24/7 number to call for advice and assistance or to report an incident. Establish a clear organizational reporting chain of command and escalation process for an effective response to any incident. And your communications plan must include all relevant parties to include liaison with local authorities and escalation process to inform leadership. The emergency response plan is not the sole solution to all emergencies, but significantly serves to minimize the confusion and indecision that often accompanies emergency situations. It outlines the basic action plan to address and respond to an emergency situation. It establishes a chain of command both internally and externally, providing timely communications as required. The priority focus of the emergency response plan is on human safety at all times. The operating environments for planned meetings or events can vary greatly depending on many factors. Considerations within the emergency response plan should not only include natural disasters, civil unrest, political instability, but the additional stressors such as data breach, lost laptop or smartphone, toxic chemical spills, or even missing personnel. Does your emergency response plan address these considerations as well? And of course, documentation can be extremely helpful in providing a timely response to any incident. The collection of various elements of information such as arrival, departure, manifest, hotel guest list, email, and mobile phone numbers for both attendees and official guests are a must. With this information and the development of an operational map, you are provided with the situational awareness needed to locate the threat when it occurs and determine who may be impacted by the threat in order to facilitate an appropriate communication and a timely response. The operational map can display as much detail as you would like. This visual representation of data is most helpful in navigating an incident quickly and efficiently. Depending on location, plotting of public transportation systems, location of external resources, and even no-go areas such as high crime areas or planned protest sites is advisable. As previously mentioned, emergency response communications are multi-directional and must serve to keep all parties informed. Once again, the communication plan here serves to efficiently communicate between all responsible parties to facilitate a coordinated and timely response. Keeping in mind, the longer it takes an organization to respond to an incident, the greater the risk to personnel, the organization, and the higher the cost. All stakeholders must be included and informed within your emergency response communications. Important note here, in response to publicly sensitive events, your crisis management committee will provide additional guidance from legal counsel, media relations, and HR. In these cases, it is best to keep any public statements as no comment until leadership guidance has been provided. And with medical-related incidents, remember you may be bound by HIPAA or other related regulations governing the protection of personal medical information. Follow your company policy or seek guidance from HR or legal concerning proper handling of personal information in medical incident. And be careful here to avoid email distribution lists in these communications. With respect to your communication plan, here are some additional considerations that should be included. Not only hotel, venue, and vendor management, but attendees and official guests communications for nearest activity location exits, venue, hotel, evacuation routes, and of course assembly areas. Local 911 emergency numbers and a safety check-in process in case of a major disaster or terrorist incident. More information is best. The more prepared individuals are in understanding the risk, how to report an incident, and what additional actions they should take, the quicker the response and the lesser the impact of the incident. As mentioned earlier, training of all parties is critical. And for those events with a high-risk profile, running scenario-based exercise training greatly assists to validate individual duties and responsibilities and provides the knowledge that fosters control and a comfort level in the face of adversity. Travel safety and cultural awareness, internet or internet links, and a quick reference card are excellent tools. Daily reminders and updates are equally helpful, not only as a reminder of the do's and the don'ts, but in keeping attendees and guests well informed. During this webinar, we have discussed the basic of risk management program for off-site meetings and events. We have explored the need for cross-functional integration for all internal parties for proper planning and coordination effort to facilitate a timely response. We understand that the longer it takes an organization to respond to an incident, the greater the impact of personnel, the organization, and the cost. We have also identified risk-based analysis. What do I have to protect? What do I have to protect it from? And what do I have to protect it with? We have examined how stressors are categorized as threats, hazards, and barriers, and how they determine your disruptor profile for the reactive and proactive response planning. We have discussed the 10 key process areas, provide a guide for an effective risk management program, and how to measure your program maturity level. We also discussed numerous considerations for venue hotel selection, transportation considerations, and how a security coordinator role can greatly assist with not only language barriers, but advanced risk assessments and liaison activities with local authorities for a timely, well-coordinated response when needed. We have explored how training initiatives for both internal and external resources can positively impact preparedness, how an effective cross-functional communication plan is essential in providing a timely response, and how your emergency response plan is a critical component in keeping all parties informed and in effecting a timely response to an incident. The ultimate goal here is to protect human safety by implementing risk mitigation strategies to reduce exposure to personnel, the company, and the cost of any impact.
All right, thank you, Bob, for sharing your expertise with us. I think we have some time for questions, and I see a few coming through our chat feature. I'll just remind everyone if it's time to type your questions into the chat feature for Bob, and he'll answer a few while we still have some time together. The first question I have, Bob, says, I'm working with the Caribbean Ministry of Tourism on an event for early 2018. Do you have a recommendation on insurance or other risk mitigation products or instruments I want to give assurance to corporate sponsors that their financial investment will be returned and should something happen.
You'll want, as far as the insurance go, you want to coordinate internally with your responsible parties for insurance. It's usually with your risk management group, your chief risk officer or risk manager, and potentially with HR that control the insurance policies that you have in place. You will want to review those to make sure that you've got the appropriate coverage you deem necessary for that environment. And then make sure that you've also got good points of contact for that insurance policy should an incident transpire and you need to engage them for support or for additional services. Did I answer the question there? I think I did. Great.
The next question we have here is, how do you inform attendees in advance without the scare factor?
So that was a good one. The main thing is that you should be informing, part of your duty of care standard comes into play here too. So you need to make sure that attendees and official guests are informed what the threat environment looks like before they go, and communicating what action should be taken and who they need to reach out to should they have any questions or need to report an incident or some kind of concern that they might have. This is where you can use your third-party providers as well for intel assessment and trip briefs for those areas, or maybe your internal analysis or security teams that are putting that information together. I understand the issue about travelers and guests maybe being concerned about certain environments, but it all comes down to good communication. So if you're communicating what the current threat environment looks like, and you're communicating who they need to reach out to for questions or concerns, or to report something, that's really where it starts, is providing that safety factor that someone's communicating with them.
Okay. The next question says, when selecting a hotel, is it better to choose a high-profile hotel with great security or a low-profile hotel with bad security?
It's a good question, and that's environment dependent. So there are some locations in the world where it's a higher risk environment, but the best option there might be providing a more upscale hotel that has excellent security and good liaison and coordination with that security entity for the hotel. There are some instances where I may not want to pick a high-profile hotel because of fear that it would be targeted, and so I want to pick something that's more nondescript about what's going on. So I understand the question, but it's really driven by what the specific threat environment is that you're looking to operate in, and you have to assess that each of those situations, each of those locations individually to make that determination. That is something that we work with our clients to help them, get some good information on to be able to provide some kind of guidance and feedback on that.
Excellent. The next question maybe is a bit specific and maybe better offline, but I'll just go ahead and ask. In your opinion, any safe hotels in Islamabad to hold meetings?
Yes and no. So it depends on where you're at. And that's a kind of an open-end question. So it's, of course, if you're doing a short trip, you've got people going in for 1 day, 2 day type thing in any environment, the risk is less. If you've got long-term projects and people are staying long periods of time, then of course that increases the ability that increases the risk profile. So are there safe hotels in Islamabad? Yes. Which ones, where are they at? That's all dependent upon the location and how long you're going to be there.
Okay, excellent. So we have another sort of specific question as well along the lines of, if you're a business traveler, what security precautions are taken for a visit to South Asian countries? And it could, again, could be something we take offline if it's more specific.
I can just talk to some general ones. So generally, you want to make sure that you've got a copy of all your complete travel itinerary, your passport and/or visas as required. You keep that information separate from your real passport. You provide a copy of that information to a family member or a close colleague, so someone knows where you're supposed to be when. You need, if you're staying in a hotel, you want to stay between the second and the seventh floor of the hotel, simply because many of the countries in Southeast Asia, that's as high as the fire ladder trucks will go. You want to make sure that you walk the fire exits, that they're clear and free of clutter. There's a tendency for hotels in that part of the world to use the fire exits as storage areas. You want to make sure that when you're in a room, you keep your door locked at all times and try to secure your valuables in the hotel safe as possible. And then you'll want to count the number of doors from your door to the fire exit. In case there's heavy smoke, you could count the number of doorways to find the exit. And those are some of the basics. But with respect to traveling when you're going abroad, you should be receiving some type of trip brief before you go from your company or organization. Again, that's something that iJet sends out automatically for those subscribers of that service. And that gives you all the necessary information about crime, safety, terrorism, health concerns, embassy contacts, those kind of issues.
Great. The next question is an interesting question. Do you envision a day when luggage will be screened in the U.S. hotels as it is in certain other regions around the world?
Not yet. I don't see that happening yet. Could it happen? Possibly. If we had if we had some more terrorist attacks involving that kind of modus operandi, that is an area we could potentially go to. But I don't see that happening yet, no.
Okay, and there's a bit of a more general question around advice that you might have for executive buy-in for this type of planning and risk management procedures.
There's always a challenge with any organization. So the main driving force here is your duty of care requirements. So, duty of care requires that your business travelers are aware of what the risk is before they go, that you're keeping them informed on any changes to the risk environment while they're there, that you're providing any necessary travel safety training or cultural awareness training that might be necessary for the environment that they're going to operate in, that they've got a one number to call 24/7, 365 to seek advice and assistance. And that you have the ability to provide in-country support up to and including security or political evacuation. So your main driver for this really is your duty of care standard to keep people informed. And then getting corporate buy-in, usually you can get help from corporate legal counsel because they're directly responsible for the liability exposure of the company and understand what the duty of care standards are. And what they need to meet. And we found through experience here that if we can get corporate counsel on board, it really helps a lot in promoting these kind of programs and systems within the organization. HR can also be of help here from the standpoint that these kind of things go to help keeping people safe and protecting them. So they can be another advocate, another support structure for you in this scenario.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, and I think what's being asked here is what criteria would you say is best to establish a non-local security liaison versus an in-country local security liaison?
I would always recommend an in-country security coordinator, if I understand the question correctly. Just like it's hard for you to do a desktop assessment of an event or location halfway around the world. It just doesn't work. So an in-country security coordinator, one who has connections with local authorities, first of all, besides speaking the language, which can be a big concern, they can really help facilitate a more timely and coordinated response by local authorities should something happen. They're familiar with local laws. They're familiar with local customs. They may speak the language. They have contacts with local agencies. So that bringing that kind of security professional in who's had experience doing these things before, can do site assessments, can do risk vulnerability assessments if need be, can advise on transportation routes, can coordinate with transportation companies, hotel security, as well as local authorities and even diplomatic missions. It needs to be an in-country resource that does that.
All right. I think we are about at the end of our questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Bob, thank you again for your time today, and thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar is part of our monthly webinar series. You can register for live webinars and explore on-demand webinar topics on our website at www.ijet.com/webinars. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to take the brief survey that will pop up when you hop off of the webinar. If you have any additional questions on the material we have shared here today, be sure to let us know via the survey. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.